These pages have carried a pulse for millennia, a tremor of voices that claim to have seen beyond the veil. Fire, storm, a chariot blazing through the heavens, beasts and crowns, songs and laments. The Bible gathers them into a single, unsettling witness, visions entrusted to men and women chosen to speak, as if the future itself had brushed their lips. What do these visions conceal, and what do they reveal? There are dragons, there are great wars, there are prostitutes.
There is the idea that the end of the world is coming, and that judgment has weight, even terror.
For thousands of years, these prophecies have been preserved, argued over, prayed through. Are they warnings from the living God about the shape of history to come, or encrypted messages, intelligible only to those schooled in the secret grammar of faith?
It's telling you a secret, but you must learn how to hear it.
The Bible is not one book, but a library bound by breath. Its poetry bleeds into law. Its law is haunted by story. Its stories are threaded with promise. Some books speak as chronicle, some legislate justice, others sing creation back to its source. Yet braided into its center are the words of the prophets: Isaiah's fire, Jeremiah's tears, Daniel's dreams, Ezekiel's wheels within wheels, and at the far edge, the revelation of John. Are these texts announcements of events that must occur, or divine confrontations with the present, spoken in time, for time?
The Hebrew word for prophet is navi. It does not primarily mean foreteller. It means one who speaks, who affirms and declares.
The tradition remembers the Navi as the mouthpiece of God, a living conduit. When the invisible desires to be heard, he calls a human voice and places fire upon the tongue.
The prophets did not all aim at the same target. Some pressed society toward justice. Some called the heart back to worship. Some stood at the hinge of history and said, "Now." That we still quote them after 2 millennia should tell us something about their weight.
Among the strands of prophetic speech, one thread gleams with peculiar intensity: the hope of a Messiah, the ancient longing for a figure anointed to mend the fracture, kingly to some, priestly to others, but in every imagination a force great enough to bend the world back toward covenant.
For some, the Messiah was royal, David renewed. For others, priestly, a sanctified steward of the temple.
But the common expectation among Jews was a great and powerful figure, one who would overthrow enemies and rule the coming kingdom.
The first century groaned under the weight of empire. Rome's eagle cast a long shadow over Judea. Taxes rose, famines bit, humiliation was a daily ritual for a people of promise. Discontent ripened into yearning. The scrolls were read with fresh hunger. When will the anointed come? In such a climate, Jesus of Nazareth appeared, teaching, healing, gathering a company around a table in a dream. Those who followed him examined every gesture, every syllable. Could this be the one, the long-awaited? In the Gospels, Jesus is called a prophet, and he clearly understands himself in that stream. But did he also consider himself more than a prophet?
My own reading leads me to believe he saw himself as the King of Israel, the Messiah, the promised one. He read the text and said, "In essence, that's me." His choices only make sense if he sincerely believed he fulfilled the promise.
History is littered with failed claimants. Leaders rose, declared liberation, and were crushed. Their movements withered in the same wind that carried their last breath. But this movement did not scatter. It intensified, transfigured through loss. Something in Jesus' own message, his pattern and prediction of suffering, gave his death a frame, and his followers a reason to remain when other disciples would have fled into anonymity.
Jesus must have signaled that suffering, even crucifixion, would be essential to his mission. Otherwise, the humiliation of the cross would have dissolved the movement overnight.
Here the scandal sharpens. In the world of Israel's hope, messiahs do not die at Roman hands. They conquer, yet the Gospels insist. The Romans arrested Jesus, charged him with sedition, and nailed him to a cross, the empire's instrument of public despair. To eyes trained by expectation, the verdict was obvious. A crucified Messiah is no Messiah at all.
Among first-century Jews, there was no messianic script that ends on a Roman cross. Crucifixion read as failure.
If the cross denied his claim, why did faith not collapse? because those first believers returned to the scriptures and began to read them under a new light. They searched not only for the triumphant king, but for a righteous sufferer, the servant pierced for the sins of the people, vindicated by God. Isaiah 53 rose like a hidden star over their horizon. He was pierced for our transgressions. By his wounds we are healed. Suffering and vindication were not an accidental detour, they argued, but the very route the Messiah would walk. The early Christians gathered every text that resonated with this pattern. Lamentations resolved in praise, a just one scorned and then exalted, and stitched them into a tapestry of recognition. This was no easy work. It demanded that seemingly disparate fragments be read as one story. A psalm of abandonment here, a promise of vindication there, a prophet's vision of a servant who bears the world's ache, all drawn together until the crucifixion and resurrection formed the axis of messianic hope. The claim was not merely that Jesus was like the scriptures, it was that the scriptures, in their deepest stratum, had always been about him.
The proof texts of the early Christian writers were the Hebrew scriptures, precisely because they could argue on shared ground. They cited chapter and verse to say, "Your texts, our Christ, these converge."
For Christians today, Jesus fulfills the messianic prophecies. The logic runs through the New Testament back to the prophets. He suffers for sins. The scripture says the anointed will suffer. Therefore, fulfillment. But prophecy is more than a map of future events. It is also a magnet, pulling the present toward its true north. The prophets thundered against injustice, idolatry, and empty ritual. They formed the conscience of Israel by calling the people to the God who demands righteousness and mercy. When Jesus speaks of judgment, of the last and the least, of the mighty cast down and the humble lifted up, he stands in their stream, yet with an apocalyptic edge, secrets revealed, histories unveiled, the end pressing inward upon the now. Jesus' words carry the vocabulary of the Son of Man, a figure from Israel's visions, mysterious, human, but more than human, mortal, but singled out for dominion in the final reckoning. Did he intend to identify himself with that figure, to signal that he embodied both judgment and mercy, both the end of an age and the beginning of a new creation?
In the Gospels, Jesus' preferred self-reference is Son of Man. It's deliberately enigmatic. It invites his hearers to ponder Daniel's visions and ask, is he claiming that role?
To pursue that question, we must pause at the door of the apocalyptic imagination. Those writings that peer past the curtain and speak of the end with symbolic intensity. Before we enter Daniel's dreams and Revelation's beasts, consider how apocalyptic language works. It is poetry under pressure. It uses monsters and mountains, angels and trumpets, to say what ordinary prose cannot say about cruelty and hope.
Apocalyptic literature arises in turbulent times. It assures the faithful that the present order, however brutal, is not the final word. Bad times will end, good times will come.
The book of Daniel stands as a hinge. Exiled in Babylon, Daniel serves foreign kings yet refuses foreign gods. He dreams and interprets, and in his visions the architecture of history quakes. He foresees suffering and desecration. He also voices a radical promise that the righteous will awaken, that death itself is not the sovereign of human destiny. In Daniel, resurrection steps onto the stage of Israel's consciousness, not as a complete doctrine, but as a seed with apocalyptic heat. For most of the Hebrew Bible, the grave is a shadowed underworld, Sheol, where memory thins and crowns are meaningless. Daniel 12 cracks the door. Many who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake. Here, judgment and mercy stretch beyond time's horizon. Here, the martyr's faith receives a future. And Daniel names a figure, one like a son of man, who receives dominion at the end of days. In that image, late Judaism and early Christianity heard a footfall. Could this be the pattern for the Messiah? A human one granted authority to bring God's kingdom to earth. No more pain, no more oppression, a reign of justice.
Jews and Christians of antiquity expected an actual person anointed by God who would make things right. Daniel's Son of Man became a lens through which that expectation sharpened.
If Jesus genuinely believed himself to be this figure, if he took upon himself the burden of Daniel's hope, then his mission cannot be reduced to moral instruction or private spirituality. He preached the kingdom's closeness, warned of judgment, welcomed outcasts, fed the hungry, healed the broken, and he set his face toward a cross that would be reshaped in his followers' memory into a throne. But the paradox remains, a Messiah crucified. Here the scandal of prophecy becomes the scandal of interpretation. Either the cross unmasked Jesus as a false claimant, or prophecy must be read anew, as the early Christians dared to do, finding in Isaiah 53 the secret path by which God's strength is perfected in weakness. Not an empire's triumph, but a servant's offering. Not a sword's victory, but a body broken and a life poured out. Not Rome outmatched, but death itself undone.
Without that interpretive turn, without Jesus' own predictions of suffering and the community's rereading of Scripture, the movement would have died with him.
In that turn, the church discovered a grammar of paradox. The mighty one arrives in humility. The Holy One bears sin. The everlasting kingdom is announced by a condemned man and verified by an empty tomb. The first are last, the last first. This is the underside of prophecy, its hidden architecture. Not prediction as tally sheet, but revelation as reversal. The divine strategy is to confound the wisdom of the wise. The question that remains is not academic, it is existential. If prophecy is the speech of God in time, what does it demand now? If the Messiah's path really runs through suffering to joy, through the cross to a kingdom, then the end is not merely future tense. It presses upon the present, summoning the faithful to inhabit the paradox, strength in weakness, hope in lament, victory in love that refuses to kill. Soon we will follow this current into deeper waters, into Daniel's night visions and the book of Revelation, where mountains explode, beasts rise, and a city descends like a bride. We will meet a John who writes in code because empires burn books and crucify dissent. We will learn how persecution gave apocalyptic its urgency, and how a disaster under Roman skies seemed, to many, like an unveiled judgment. But before we turn that page, let one truth settle. Prophecy does not flatter the powerful. It speaks from the margins, from deserts and prisons, from exile and occupied streets, from fishermen and tent makers and weeping priests. It is the poetry of a people refusing to bow to idols, the poetry of a God who refuses to abandon his world. The visions remain, luminous and wild. They call for readers who can hear secrets without craving spectacle, who can inhabit symbols without surrendering to superstition, who can distinguish between fortune-telling and faithfulness. The prophets did not hand us a calendar, they handed us a compass. The Messiah did not offer an escape, he offered a kingdom that begins in the heart and stretches to the ends of the earth. To read the Bible's prophecies, then, is to enter a house of mirrors that finally becomes a window. We see beasts, and then we see our empires. We see a suffering servant, and then we see a God whose power is love. We see a Son of Man, and then we see our humanity lifted, judged, and redeemed. We see crosses, and in their shadow, the outline of an empty garden at dawn. The mystery endures because the world does. Injustice persists, hope persists, and the ancient words keep finding new listeners. This is why the prophets still speak, why Isaiah still burns, why Daniel still dreams, why Jesus still unsettles kings, priests, and politely religious souls. The voice that thundered then has not fallen silent. It waits in the text for ears to open. The secrets are not for the clever alone. They are for the faithful, those who will let the words read them and then live. If the prophecies of Daniel cracked open the grave and offered resurrection as a possibility, the book of Revelation tears the veil wide open, unleashing an avalanche of symbols, beasts with 10 horns, riders on horses pale as death, a city arrayed like a bride, and a river of life running through its center. Revelation has long been both the most read and least understood book in the Christian scriptures, the one that fascinates and unsettles, inspires and terrifies. It is filled with creatures that look like they belong more to science fiction than to synagogue, Monsters, armies of insects, faces like lions, dragons bent on destruction. Its imagery is bizarre, but it is not meaningless. What if Revelation is not a coded roadmap of the 21st century, but a dispatch from the 1st century? A letter written in trembling faith by a man exiled on the island of Patmos. His name was John, but not necessarily the John of the Gospel. This was another John, steeped in the visions of Daniel and Ezekiel, watching as Rome pressed its heel harder and harder upon his people. His words throb with both terror and hope. For many Christians under Roman rule, the world was ending, not cosmically, but personally. Brothers were burned alive, sisters tortured, parents and children crucified like their Lord. The empire demanded allegiance, and confession of Christ carried a death sentence. In such a crucible, how do you write? You write in code.
You cannot denounce Rome openly. To write, Rome will fall, is to invite execution. So you mask it in metaphor, a beast rising from the sea, a horde drunk on the blood of saints, 7 hills hiding beneath the image of 7 heads. Everyone in the 1st century knew the code.
The whore of Babylon sitting on a beast with 7 heads, drinking from a cup of blood, is not random. 7 hills is Rome. The blood is the martyrs. It is an indictment written in symbol, but it was clear to those who had eyes to see.
Rome was not invincible. To the persecuted, the eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD looked like a sign. A mountain had exploded, the sea was poisoned, the sky went black. For those who had just buried their martyrs, this seemed divine retribution, God's hand against the empire that shed innocent blood. The visions of Revelation echo such events. The falling mountain, the poisoned waters, the darkened heavens. These are not abstract fantasies, but the language of judgment in real time. John's readers did not need a degree in eschatology. They needed assurance that their suffering was not unnoticed, that God himself was moving against their oppressors.
The purpose of Revelation is not to lay out a timeline for our future. It is to say to persecuted Christians, hold on, God sees. Rome will fall. The Lamb will triumph.
But paradoxically, to speak of soon in the language of eternity is to invite endless expectation. Rome did not fall immediately. The empire endured for centuries, so the text, once written for the urgent now, became a lens for generations to peer through. Every age facing its tyrants and terrors has found itself in Revelation's images. Napoleon, Hitler, Stalin, pandemics, plagues. Each century holds up its fear and says, here is the beast. The prophecy renews itself because suffering renews itself.
The power of Revelation lies in its ability to speak into crisis again and again. Each community under oppression can decode its symbols anew.
This is the strange paradox of prophecy. It is time-bound and timeless, urgent and eternal. It speaks to Rome, but it speaks also to every empire that drinks the blood of the powerless. Its monsters are metaphors, but its metaphors are mirrors. And each reader must ask, where do we see Babylon today? Yet the book of Revelation is not only terror.
It is hope written in fire. At its center stands not Rome's eagle, but the slain lamb, violence overcome by sacrifice, domination overturned by surrender. The lion roars by bleeding. The kingdom comes by crucifixion love.
Revelation dares to imagine history ending not in empire's triumph, but in God's.
It tells its secrets to those who belong to the movement. Outsiders read monsters. Insiders read consolation. It is secret writing, encoded but luminous to the faithful.
But Revelation was not the only apocalyptic voice. Centuries earlier, Ezekiel had written with equal strangeness. A young priest dragged into Babylonian exile, Ezekiel did not merely lament. He saw visions, fire, storm, a throne on wheels, creatures with wings and eyes, wheels within wheels. If Daniel dreams with symbolic clarity, Ezekiel dreams with psychedelic intensity.
Ezekiel sees the throne of God not fixed in Jerusalem's temple, but mounted on wheels. God is not localized. He is mobile, present everywhere. This was radical. God could ride into exile with his people.
Some dismissed Ezekiel as mad, his visions hallucinations of a fanatic. Others saw in him the fountainhead of mystical tradition. His imagery would later seed what became Kabbalah, the Jewish mysticism that sought to peer directly into the infinite. For Ezekiel, to see God was to see light. Light not of the sun, but of essence, a spiritual energy woven into the human soul.
Ezekiel becomes the patron of those who long for direct encounter. His visions bypass temple and priesthood, offering the possibility of an unmediated experience of God. That is why later rabbis considered the book dangerous, limiting its study to the mature. Mysticism is potent. It can liberate, but it can also unhinge.
The danger of Ezekiel's visions lay precisely in their empowerment. If any soul might ascend by contemplation and fasting, the monopoly of priest and sacrifice is broken. Authority trembles when vision is democratized. Thus Ezekiel became both threat and treasure. Threat to established order, treasure to seekers who long to encounter the holy directly. David Wolpe, mysticism is dangerous because it empowers ordinary people. If you believe you have seen God, institutions can no longer contain you. Yet the visions did not remain locked in Judaism. Their currents flowed into Christianity, where apocalyptic and mystical elements converged. The rapture, so often spoken of today, is not Revelation's language but Paul's. In his first letter to the Thessalonians, he assures believers who feared their dead would miss Christ's return. The dead will rise first, he writes. Then we who are alive will be caught up together with them in the clouds. This image of bodies rising, of the living and the dead together ascending to meet the Lord, electrified generations. It promised that death was no barrier to belonging. Even if the kingdom arrived tomorrow, no believer would be left behind. Gary Burge. Paul's aim is pastoral, to comfort the grieving, to say, your loved ones are not lost. They will share in the coming glory. But John of Patmos never speaks of rapture. His vision is not of souls being taken away, but of heaven descending. The New Jerusalem, a city where God dwells with humanity. The images differ, but both are attempts to sketch the unimaginable, the world remade, the reign of God established, the last enemy, death, destroyed. Over time, interpreters blended these visions, Paul's caught up ones with John's tribulation and victory, into a composite end times expectation. Yet originally they were distinct. The tension between them reveals something deeper. Prophecy is not uniform. It is multi-voiced, a chorus singing variations on hope. And so, across centuries, prophecy shifts between terror and comfort, code and clarity, vision and command. Its purpose is not to satisfy curiosity about dates, but to galvanize faith, to keep the oppressed from despair, to remind the faithful that history has an author and an end. This is why, even now, the Bible's prophecies remain alive, not because they chart every earthquake or name every tyrant, but because they point to a reality beyond the reach of empires, that justice will have the final word, that mercy is stronger than violence, and that God is weaving even catastrophe into a tapestry of redemption. The prophets did not pretend to predict weather reports centuries in advance. They spoke of God's claim upon the present, His judgment upon cruelty, His solidarity with the broken, His promise to make all things new. Candida Moss. That is why the Bible still vibrates with energy. Its prophecies feel unfinished, still waiting, still unfolding. They invite us to live in expectation. Ezekiel's wheels, Daniel's Son of Man, John's beasts, Paul's rapture, all are facets of one truth. The world is not ultimate. There is more than empire, more than suffering, more than the grave. The prophets are not scientists or fortune tellers. They are poets of God's insistence. Their strange visions pull us out of complacency, reminding us that behind history's turbulence burns an eternal fire. To read them is to enter that fire, to be seared by mystery, and to emerge with eyes lit by hope. The apocalypse is not only a future event, it is the unveiling of the present. It is the recognition that Babylon still drinks, that lambs still suffer, that injustice still crucifies, and that even so, God's kingdom presses in. The visions leave us unsettled because they are meant to. They whisper that empires fall, that death is not final, that even ashes may conceal new creation. In the end, the secret language of prophecy is not about secret calendars. It is about revealing what is hidden in plain sight, the reign of God, the call to faithfulness, the invitation to endure with hope. This is the heartbeat of Revelation, the fire of Ezekiel, the comfort of Paul, the cry of Daniel. Hold fast, trust the vision. The end is not destruction but renewal. The secrets are not locked away. They are offered to those with eyes to see. If prophecy speaks in riddles, then its deepest riddle may be this, that what looks like the end may in fact be a beginning. From Moses on Sinai to John on Patmos, prophecy bends time into strange shapes, past, present, and future, overlapping in visions where deserts bloom, bones rise, and nations fall. And yet behind every fiery oracle, one truth persists. God speaks, and his word unsettles everything we thought was secure. Of all the prophets, none embodies this more vividly than Ezekiel. His visions are infamous. Wheels of fire rimmed with eyes, creatures part beast and part angel, a throne upon a storm. Exiled in Babylon, stripped of temple and homeland, Ezekiel dares to declare that God is not confined to Jerusalem. He sees the throne of the Lord rolling like lightning across the heavens, mobile, free, sovereign. The exile had torn away the sacred center, but Ezekiel insists the center is everywhere. Ezekiel does not offer mere parable or sermon. He sees, and then he dares to describe the indescribable. His visions are wild, cosmic, uncontainable. Some mocked him as mad, a priest intoxicated with grief. But others heard in his visions the pulse of mystery, the seed of mysticism. His descriptions of light beyond light, of energy alive within the soul, became the foundation for Kabbalah, that stream of Jewish mysticism which dares to gaze directly into the infinite.
Kabbalah, rooted in Ezekiel, speaks of God as light, not ordinary light, but the energy of being itself. That same spark glows within us, linking our hidden depths to the divine source.
Yet mysticism unsettled the guardians of order. To say that each soul might pierce heaven through vision and contemplation was to challenge the authority of priests and laws. It threatened to democratize the holy. No wonder rabbis restricted Kabbalah to the wise, the married, the mature. Mysticism is fire. It can warm, but it can also consume.
Mysticism empowers. To believe you have seen God is to stand unafraid before kings and temples alike. It is dangerous, and it is holy.
Prophecy, mysticism, apocalypse. These threads twist together through Scripture. They carry not only comfort but also danger, for prophecy invites human beings to imagine differently, to live differently, to resist the empires of their age. This is why prophecy has often been suppressed, why mystics are exiled, why visionaries are crucified. And yet, the visions persist. Consider Paul, writing to Thessalonica around 52 AD, the earliest letter we possess from the New Testament. His friends are worried. They had expected Christ's return before any of them died, but loved ones have passed away and hope trembles. Paul answers not with denial but with vision. The dead will rise first, then we who are alive will be caught up with them in the clouds to meet the Lord. The rapture, as later tradition called it, was born, not as a timetable, but as comfort. Paul insists no one is excluded. The grave is not final. Death cannot separate the faithful from the kingdom to come. But Revelation's John offers another vision, not of believers caught away, but of heaven descending. The New Jerusalem, radiant with light, comes down to earth. The dwelling of God is with humanity. No temple, for God himself is the temple. No sun, for the Lamb is its lamp. Paul's comfort and John's hope, distinct yet convergent, both point beyond despair to the reign of God. Over centuries, interpreters merged Paul's rapture and John's apocalypse into a single end-time drama. But in their original voices, they show us something subtler. Prophecy does not speak in unison, but in harmony. Different prophets, different symbols, yet the same refrain: suffering is not final, death is not sovereign, injustice will not endure. Prophecy gives meaning to misery. It tells the poor and oppressed, endure, for there is more than what you see. This is why prophecy flourishes in turbulence. Daniel's visions rose under Babylon. Revelation thundered under Rome. Ezekiel dreamed in exile. The words catch fire precisely when the world seems most barren. Prophecy is not the luxury of the secure. It is the lifeline of the desperate. And so from age to age, prophecy is reborn. In every empire, Babylon rises again. In every age, revelation is decoded anew. Napoleon, Hitler, modern tyrants, all have been cast as beasts. Plagues and earthquakes, pandemics and wars, all have been read as seals breaking, trumpets sounding. Revelation is less a prediction of any single moment than a mirror in which every age sees its own terrors. That is its genius. Revelation lives because it can be reread in every crisis. Its monsters are our monsters. Its hope is our hope. But if its beasts are mirrors, then so is its lamb. At the center of John's wild apocalypse is not terror but tenderness, a slain lamb, standing. The paradox of prophecy crystallizes here. Victory comes not by sword, but by sacrifice. Not by domination, but by surrender. The lamb conquers by bleeding. This is the secret the prophets whisper through their thunder, that God's power does not mimic empire's power. The kingdom is not Caesar's kingdom, with a pious mask. It is upside down. The last are first, the humble are exalted. The cross is a throne, the grave is a womb. The model is Moses, the one who receives and delivers revelation. The prophet is the spokesperson of God, but in Jesus, the pattern is transformed. He is not merely mouthpiece, he is message. He embodies what he proclaims. This is why early Christians searched the Hebrew scriptures so fervently. They saw in Isaiah's servant, in Daniel's Son of Man, in Ezekiel's wheels, the outlines of their crucified and risen Lord. They stitched fragments into a new tapestry, reading ancient texts as prefigurations of the Christ event. It was not historical proof so much as theological recognition. The Spirit had unveiled the mystery, and so prophecy became not only a memory of Israel, but the charter of the church. The cross interpreted by Isaiah, the resurrection foreshadowed by Daniel, the kingdom unveiled by Revelation. The voices converged in Christ, who was both prophet and fulfillment, both Son of Man and Son of God. But even here, mystery remains. Did Jesus himself believe he was Daniel's figure, the Son of Man who receives dominion? Did he expect to return within a generation? Did he envision the apocalypse as imminent? The Gospels hint at urgency, at imminence, at a kingdom close enough to touch. Yet centuries have passed, and still the kingdom tarries, and yet the words remain alive, perhaps because prophecy is less about prediction than about posture. It teaches us to live in expectation, to read history as pregnant, to see in every empire the shadow of Babylon, and in every act of mercy the foretaste of Jerusalem descending. The riddle of prophecy is that it always speaks to the present. It called Israel from idolatry, it warned kings, it comforted exiles, it strengthened martyrs, and it continues to unsettle us today, asking, which empire do you serve? Which lamb do you follow? Which kingdom do you await? David Wolpe. I read the Bible not only because it intrigues my mind, but because it elevates my spirit. It offers me a glimpse of God, a sense that my life is part of something larger, eternal. And in that, I am not alone. Perhaps this is the final secret of prophecy. Not that it unveils dates, but that it unveils God. Its beasts and visions are not there to satisfy curiosity, but to crack open complacency, to make us ask who we are and whose we are. The Bible endures because it speaks in unfinished sentences. Its prophecies are not neatly closed, but vibrate with expectation. They invite each generation to step inside and discover that the story is still unfolding. The Messiah has come, and yet we still await him. The kingdom is here, and yet it is still to come. Death has been conquered, and yet it still wounds. The paradox is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. And so the prophets still call, Daniel still dreams, Ezekiel still beholds wheels of fire, John still writes in code from exile, Paul still comforts the grieving, and Jesus still unsettles our kingdoms with his lamb-like reign. For thousands of years, these visions have provoked hope, fear, debate, and devotion. They have inspired martyrs, mystics, reformers, and dreamers. They have been quoted by tyrants and sung by slaves. They have been the last words of the dying and the first words of the newly baptized. They are riddles, yes, but riddles whose answers are written in lives of faith. The prophets invite us not merely to speculate, but to live as if the kingdom were near, to resist Babylon in all its forms, to bear witness to the Lamb in all his paradox, to expect resurrection even in the valley of dry bones. The secret language of prophecy is not only for scholars or mystics. It is for the faithful, those who can hear in the thunder of beasts the still small voice of hope. Those who can read in the slain lamb the face of God. Those who can endure because they know the story is not over. For the story continues. Babylon falls, Jerusalem descends, the dead rise, the Lamb reigns. And we, caught between vision and fulfillment, are called to live as those who already glimpse the dawn. This is the mystery that has haunted saints and skeptics alike, that in a world of injustice, prophecy dares to say, justice will prevail. That in a world of death, prophecy insists life is stronger. That in a world of despair, prophecy whispers hope. The prophets have spoken, the visions endure. The question is not whether they were right about dates or empires. The question is whether we will hear them now and live.